Go play Vintage Story. This is the message I gathered when I was reading the comments for my old and new videos. And it was so funny that you all brought it up recently because wouldn't you believe it that I actually already have the game and just never gave it an honest shot because I got sidetracked with other projects? I kind of just forgot about it. Oops. That being said, I'm so glad you guys in the comments reminded me it existed because Vintage Story is genuinely one of the coolest gaming experiences I've had in a very long time. Like, I had no idea that the game would make me feel like this, but it did. In just 12 hours of gameplay for this video, it did. And no worries, I'll explain how, but before I begin, I do need to give some disclaimers. For starters, this review is going to be based on the beginning of the game to the late Copper Age. While normally I'd play a game until I'm as close to the end as possible, this game's mechanics take so much time to progress through that if I waited until I hit actual endgame, this video would never come out. I'm going to be so real with you. And my next disclaimer is that this game isn't for everyone. It's a genuine survival experience that is hard as nails. Where Minecraft remains to be a peaceful and pretty light-hearted creative sandbox game with survival elements sprinkled in, Vintage Story hates you. And I don't mean that in the way that the game wants you to stop playing, I mean that you will likely have a romantic dinner with death in many ways, including but not limited to hunger, wolves, bears, tiny eldritch men, more on this later, and being a victim to gravity. This game is brutal, unforgiving, and losing is part of the learning process in this game, so if you can't handle that, I would not recommend this game to you. You would have a miserable time. With the disclaimers out of the way, if you like what you see here today, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. Or don't. I mean, you do you. I'm not your mom. And let's get to talking about Vintage Story. Vintage Story is a wilderness survival sandbox game made by an ex-developer of Hytale, who left supposedly for creative differences, but I don't have a lot of facts on that other than what I've heard, so take that for what you will. This game often gets compared to Minecraft, or even sometimes called a Minecraft clone. However, while up front it may seem that way, once you get into it, this could not be further from the truth. Where Minecraft is a creative sandbox that has some survival elements sprinkled into it, Vintage Story is a game of surviving the harsh cruelty of its own world. In order to survive, you need to withstand harsh weather, solve hunger, and fend off untamed wilderness or the occasional interdimensional invasion. The game is from start to finish a survival experience. There is no relaxation for you. Even once you build your little dirt shelter that you'll likely start the game with, you'll actually find out there's a lot more issues that pop up once you've built that shelter, and there's a lot of things that you won't know the answer to. Things like how to have sustainable food, how to put better lights in my house, and how to have a tool that's better than just a rock I attach to a stick. Then once these issues are solved, even more show up, and this is where the game truly shines. This progressive set of new issues actually makes for a fantastic motivator where you get the satisfaction of solving one problem, but you're presented with another so you aren't ever left with the feeling that you're done. It made me feel like a caveman that was discovering fire, which funnily enough is actually something you need to figure out in the early game. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure I also made caveman noises when I made fire. Now it is worth noting that you're not left to figure this all out on your own. The game's actually kind enough to hand you a handbook that loosely tells you how to get to certain stages of the game, but also leaves information vague enough so you're left questioning details. For better or for worse. Also, unlike other games, you don't just immediately make a pickaxe and start digging down. Instead, you have to actually find clay to make molds in a crucible, put it in a pit kiln, and then pan for some early copper. Then after that, you still aren't quite out of the Stone Age because the way you're getting copper is currently unreliable, so now you have to make a prospecting pick, which from what I remember the game doesn't tell you about, but trust me, you need it, a pickaxe and a hammer. Then we're still not done because now you have to triangulate where a copper vein is, then go on a mining trip checking for ore veins that spawn like deep rock pancakes, while hoping you don't run into quartz. Then once you figure all this out, you'll leave with tons more in hand and the game truly unlocks for you. And by that, I mean it was by this point I was finally allowed to make my house not a dirt shack anymore. This journey, in total, took me 12 hours to get here. Even though this sounds tedious, it also gave me the biggest sense of satisfaction that I've had in a fair bit with a game. I worked hard for that copper. I started with sticks and now found my way to using basic tools of a cheap metal. It's a lot of hard work for a real sense of accomplishment. Everything had its process, and going through it all was emotional, but in the end ultimately enjoyable. In a game like Minecraft, you can make endgame gear in the first few hours of play if you beeline for it, and it ultimately feels unsatisfying because, in my opinion, there wasn't really a challenge to getting there. Whereas here, the challenge to getting your first set of metal tools was immense and time-consuming, but when you overcome that hurdle, it feels like you can just take on anything. Up until the bear reminds you that you are not invincible. Getting your first metal weapons doesn't make the wilderness any less dangerous, and honestly, I am a big fan of that fact. I don't mind being vulnerable. I don't mind the fact that I am not invincible. In fact, it makes the game more interesting to me. Speaking of interesting, it's by this point that you might have actually had numerous encounters with those little eldritch dudes I was talking about called drifters. Drifters are weird flesh monsters from these little rifts that hurl rocks at the player and have a pretty nasty melee attack. There's many variants of them, each more dangerous than the last. They tend to spawn in from rifts at night, in dark caves, temporal storms, or when your sanity decides to go on vacation. My sanity went on vacation years ago and I'm still waiting for it to come back. What are these rifts, you may ask? Why, obviously they're rifts into the Rust world, which isn't so much of a dimension more than it is a universal constant. This game actually has lore, and while it won't spell it out for you, it does give you indications that there's some direction. Just enough direction to leave a player with questions, which is honestly really smart and lets the player's imagination run wild. Do I know anything about the lore? Absolutely not. I just found out how to make planks in my last hour of play before I started recording this voiceover, so I'm not gonna know anything. Don't come to me with questions, I don't have answers. But it's there! For those of you who like that sort of thing. Now this may sound like a lot for you to take in, and it is, but despite this, the game tends to have these moments to let you just take everything in, and I'm glad it does, because the game is very atmospherically beautiful. The color choices are rustic, yet they're still pretty to look at and make the world feel lively. It makes the world feel kind of ancient, and gives you a lot more of an air of like, oh, I'm new here, and the world's been here far longer than I have. Which, given the lore, really nice touch. The shading is pretty nice as well, and the lighting will actually dim with the clouds as they cover the sun. With all the moving grass and leaves with the wind, the world feels like it breathes and it feels alive, and I love it. It's so cool. Speaking of clouds and wind, weather in this game is handled in a way that I haven't experienced in another game before. What I mean is where other games would make your entire world experience rain, this game has legitimate thunderstorms you can both enter and exit without it affecting the whole map. Wind speeds can change, so sometimes the leaves and the grass will blow harder or softer on certain days. There's genuine temperature, so you can experience actual temperature-based dilemmas. And supposedly there's seasons, but in the short time I was allotted to play this game to meet my weekly upload schedule, I'd never reached that point, so it's supposedly. I've heard there's a winter. Also, there is some form of extreme weather, but the only one I experienced was the temporal storm. The temporal storm will tank your temporal stability meter, which is basically the same as sanity from Don't Starve, and sends loads of drifters your way. This storm is exceedingly dangerous, and you probably shouldn't go outside unless you're well equipped to handle it, but even then I'd probably just stay inside. There is just so many cool little details in the game that honestly, even if you understood the core mechanics, you could potentially spend numerous hours just exploring and tinkering with each individual feature. And the music? The music? Oh my god, just listen to this beauty. It is so good. It's like as if RuneScape had music that wasn't made of midis. If someone's got a better description, let me know, but that's what I'm thinking. Can I get this on Spotify, please? I had unironically listened to it the entire time I'm working on scripts. Genuinely, they're all jams. Now, with all that being said, it is an early access title, and with that does come legit critiques I had while I played the game for as long as I did. Starting off, prospecting is actually shit, like legitimately a time-consuming process that is just straight confusing, inorganic, and kind of ass. It is so bad that it was one of the first 3 things I wrote in my cliff notes after day 1 of play. Look, triangulating resources, really cool concept, but the problem is that this is one of those mechanics that you have to genuinely look up, as the handbook does not go into enough detail to inform a new player how to efficiently do so without burning through their first prospecting pick. So my immediate advice to a new player is once you're at this point, there is zero shame in looking at a guide. Because even with the guide, I spent 4 hours of my 12-hour playtime just trying to find my first actual vein of copper, as the first one was blocked by quartz. Yeehaw! And to make matters worse, if you mess up all of this, you have to go back to panning, which is another part of criticism I like to dish out. Panning is annoying because it's your early game form of getting copper, but it's also incredibly inefficient as it gives you random resources on top of not even guaranteeing a resource in the first place. Now I will say I understand the point of this. It's supposed to be inefficient, but when I was talking about prospecting and how hard it is to learn just vein mining, if your prospecting pick breaks, you are back to panning, and that's why this is becoming a problem. The problem with panning is that it's not just a chance to get a resource, it's a chance to get a resource with a chance to get any of the resources in the game. I get in real life panning does yield multiple resources, but when I'm trying to search for copper in the early game, this becomes incredibly annoying because now I have to fish through 40 other resources just to get copper. And when you do get those extra resources, it clutters your inventory with rocks you might not even be able to use right away. So in my opinion, I think the rate in which the player receives copper either needs to be increased or the spare minerals need to be removed. That's just my take. These two things in conjunction is where I feel like this game might lose some players, just due to the major time commitment that is required for the potential that it just doesn't pay out. If panning got fixed, it would make prospecting feel a lot less punishing for a player to figure out. But what do I know? I ain't a game dev, my job is literally to complain. Also praise, but complain. The last complaint I have is that sometimes you might start an action, but it never completes, but if you just retry that action, suddenly it starts working, especially with the fire starter. Other than that, I don't think I have a whole lot of other complaints. For an early access title, the game seems to be relatively well polished and clear of any glaring bugs that need fixing. So I guess the question is, would I recommend this game? If you are someone who likes a challenging, authentic survival experience that gives you occasional downtime to take in your work, I could not recommend the game enough. I myself am a big fan of games like this, and with the game still being worked on, I cannot wait to see where this game goes. Hell, I'm excited to get back to playing it after I record this. It is so good. If you want to get the game for yourself, it's bought on their own personal website as of the time of this upload, and I provided a link down below if you're interested. If y'all have any other games you want me to check out, leave a comment down below. I'm typically pretty good about responding to them. Other than that, this has been The Bottom Dweller. May the bear not strike you down.